This is a profound strategic threat to the United States of America.
Yeah.
Lose your universities, you will lose the country. The Jewish people and anti-Semitism is an early warning system to an enemy of democracy.
Shalom and welcome to In Our Neighborhood. Anti-Semitism, often called the oldest hatred, is a relentless prejudice that has persisted for millennia. In our time, anti-Zionism has become a convenient facade for this hatred, with Israel's existence frequently used as a pretext to vilify and target Jewish communities around the world. A stark example of this unfolded recently in Amsterdam, where Israelis were hunted and harassed at a soccer game, a chilling modern-day pogrom that serves as a stark reminder of how alive this ancient hatred remains. There's no one better to help us unpack the complexities of this topic than Dr. Charles Asher Small. As the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy, and the author of the groundbreaking 6-volume Global Antisemitism, A Crisis of Modernity, Dr. Small is one of the foremost experts on this topic. With a career spanning top universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, and Tel Aviv, he has dedicated his life to studying and combating this persistent hatred.
I had a grandfather who grew up in the US, told me the stories of the anti-Semitism he experienced as a young man. He's telling me as his grandson, this is the kind of stuff we dealt with. You no longer have to deal with it. And I think Jewish people around the world thought for a short time that it was a thing of the past. How do we get to the point where it is okay today to be openly anti-Semitic again?
During the time of Enlightenment, from the late 1800s up until the Holocaust,
Yeah.
the Jewish people were perceived as not being white, and we were perceived as poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race.
Yeah.
This culminates in the Holocaust and the extermination of the Jewish people. And then, less than 2 generations later, scholars, academics, are now saying Jewish people are white, and that Jewish people have now become the embodiment of white supremacy, of racism, of apartheid, and white settler colonialism in our land of Israel. I attended a program at Columbia University after October the 7th. These are tenured professors at one of the best universities in the world and doctoral students at an elite university. These are smart, intelligent people. Yeah. And there was a professor, a woman, professor of gender studies, a feminist, in quotations, arguing that even the sexual crimes, the brutality, the rapes, and the mutilation that the Hamas barbarians videotaped and beamed it to the world was justified, and the fault of the problem was not on the Palestinian Hamas people who doing this. The fault was on the fact that Jews were on the land, and if the Jews would leave the land, there would be no need for resistance and violence. So it's blaming the victim.
Yeah.
It's insane. And this was a very sophisticated intellectual call, not just for the destruction of the State of Israel, but for the murder of Jewish people around the world, because any Jew, any student, any faculty member who is Jewish, and I suspect Christians who support Israel, becomes an enemy of all that is good and decent in this twisted paradigm. This is what young Americans and young Europeans are learning. They are learning to justify the destruction of Israel and the murder of Jewish people at the most sophisticated intellectual level. So it's coming from the classroom, it's on our campus, and it's now on the streets. Young Americans, Canadians, British Jews, French Jews, Belgian Jews are literally being attacked in the streets. Gunshots going into businesses, windows being broken, Jews being attacked on the streets. This is chaos, but this is an early warning system for democracy. This is an early warning system for our Western countries. And I hope that non-Jews in the West understand what's at stake, because this will not end with the Jewish people.
I hope they understand before it's too late, because lack of morality and lack of values and lack of a sense of direction, they're a slippery slope.
Absolutely.
And once a nation loses that completely, it's very hard to go back without destruction. How is it that narrative has been rooted so strong into the academic world that now the public automatically gravitates towards that messaging?
So political Islam basically emerges about 100 years ago in Egypt from the Muslim Brotherhood was created 100 years ago as a reaction to British colonialism. And it basically takes European anti-Semitism the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the words and the lies that led to the extermination of the Jewish people, and fuses that with even forms of Nazism and a very narrow, if not perverted, notion of Islam. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Iranian Revolutionary Regime, all these Islamist movements and ideologies have its intellectual heritage from the Muslim Brotherhood emerging in Egypt 100 years ago. The spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood was a man named Yosef Kaudawi. Throughout his whole life, he argued that the true believer, the true Muslim, is morally obligated to complete the work of Hitler. So this is the Muslim Brotherhood: genocidal, anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, sexist, homophobic. And on the other hand, you have this emergence of sort of post-colonial theory in the universities. Western hegemony, Western power, American power, Christian power became a problematic notion in the academy in Western universities. So you have these sort of two very powerful, strange bedfellows: secular Western postmodern theory and thought, and radical Islamist thought. And in a way, this is the Red-Green Alliance that kind of emerges in the West out of the universities. And this created this sort of encampment where, Jewish faculty and students were physically stopped in the United States of America from going to their classroom.
There couldn't be anything more contrary to each other.
Yeah.
How did they even get to that point? Like, I'm having trouble wrapping my mind around it.
We have to remember that anti-Semitism is deeply rooted in Western civilization. So it's now, these old ideas are now coming back into the West, and it's resonating. And I think we also have to remember, for the past 40 years, the Muslim Brotherhood has been supporting our education, higher education in the United States and around the Western world. The Qatari regime has been pumping tens of billions of dollars, at least, into the United States, into higher education. Qatar, on behalf of the Muslim Brotherhood, gives more money to American universities than any other country in the world. And I think this has been fueling the anti-Semitism in the classroom and on the campuses of the best universities in the United States, in the Western world. And this, to me, is really criminal, because universities, I think, have a sacred mission to provide critical liberal education, and to take money from a regime that calls for the murder of Jewish people around the world, the destruction of Israel, the subjugation of women, and sort of destroying the United States as well as Israel, is unbelievable. It's really, to me, this is scandalous, and we can see, all these years of funding being played out in the United States on our streets and on our campuses. And this is a strategic problem for the West and for the United States. Professor Elie Wiesel, who I had the great honor of starting ISGAP with, he always argued that anti-Semitism is not a parochial problem for the Jewish people or for the state of Israel. Anti-Semitism begins with the Jewish people, but it never ends with the Jewish people. And now you can see the anti-Semites, rolling around on the streets of great American cities, and really wreaking havoc and intimidating people, and calling not only for the destruction of Israel, but even for the destruction of the United States. They insult the police, they insult everybody. It's incredible.
I've heard you use in the past the word soft takeover, as in the Qataris and that mindset and the money that funds it, slowly and softly taking over the academic world.
40 years ago, the Swiss intelligence services found documents from the Muslim Brotherhood outlining their mission. And their mission was to take Israel and move it away from the United States, politically, economically, diplomatically, to isolate Israel, to destroy it, and then to use anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken the United States of America. This is their stated objective. And sort of right under our noses, they've successfully done this. We found 10 billion, with a B, dollars coming from Qatar, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, into Cornell University. So this is how deep the rot, the intellectual and moral rot, has gone into our university system. And we know that the universities are probably the most important institution in any democratic society. It's where young people learn to become citizens. And our enemies know influence, twist, hijack our universities, and within a very short period of time, you take over the country. Our future leaders, our future journalists, our future professors, leaders of industry are being educated now. We're reaching the second generation of people's minds being poisoned by anti-Western, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic rhetoric and education. It's really it's a serious threat. Some of the hostages in Gaza are American citizens. I don't remember a time when Americans were marching in the streets at such numbers, supporting the people who have captured American citizens.
But how do people see that? How do you get people to see what's really happening?
I think we need strong political and moral leadership. We need our institutions to be responsible, from universities to the halls of government. We've been taking money from our enemies, and it's having an impact. We've been kicking the can down the road regarding Iran. Iran has a ring of fire around Israel. Iran is supporting the kinetic war against not just Israel, but the United States and its interests. If the West doesn't stand up, I think especially if the United States doesn't stand up, if American Christians don't stand up, it's just going to the conflict is encroaching, it's coming. And I think we have to start attacking the source. We have to start attacking, Iran and defending allies of the West. And I think our institutions who are in bed with them, benefiting, for 2 pieces of silver, having a quick fix of money and infusion to develop their businesses, it's a strategic problem for our country. So we're living in a time when, the truth is relative. And I think once you lose, notions of good and evil, of God, of truth, we're in serious trouble at many levels.
Where do you find hope in this situation?
For me, the hope is really, I think the Jewish response has been incredible. I think for decades, I think many people, especially in the United States, Jewish people in the United States, there was a level of assimilation. And I think in the last 8 or 9 months, there's been a real kind of returning to Jewish wisdom. The Jewish community is becoming more strengthened, I think. The greatest racist crime, perhaps, in the history of humanity was carried out predominantly against Ashkenazi Jews because they were not white, and the European Nazis exterminated them systematically. And now these intellectual clowns are saying, well, the Ashkenazi people are white and Israelis are white. People have the right to define themselves. And of all the people in this world that have the right to define themselves, I think the Jewish people certainly do. And for so many centuries, the enemies of the Jewish people have been defining us. The wonderful thing is sort of this awakening of the Jewish community is that we're going back to our identity of who we are. We're not a racialized group, we're a nation, we're a people. And there are people who come from Africa, and come from Europe, and come from Asia, and we're indigenous to this part of the world. And anybody who picks up a Torah, anybody who picks up the New Testament or the Quran, know exactly who the indigenous people of this world is. We don't want to be defined as not white by a group of Nazis or white by a group of radical leftists. We know who we are, and I think this consciousness that's kind of coming back into our community is a wonderful thing.
I like the way you put that. I want to thank you for coming and taking the time.
Honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
I also want to thank you for remaining optimistic, even though it's a very, very hard uphill battle to fight. And I think the world needs more of that. More people who are on the right kind of crusade of justice and truth, and aren't afraid to speak up for it.
There's a role for us here in this world, so we're here. Yeah.
Thank you for joining this important conversation. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this video, and help ensure the truth gets out. Your support makes a real difference.